Anyway, all right. Got a ton of stuff here. Pro Football Talk has their funny. I did a preseason poll. They did one. I want to look at that. CBS did the top 100 football players. I'm doing the top 20. I think you're going to be shocked. I think you're going to absolutely be shocked. We're going to do that. But as we started the program off, Nick Sirianni's 42nd birthday. Happy birthday, Coach. Let's get back at what's his. Tell me what you think your boy's role is as head coach. I heard all these crazy. He picks the coaches. No, he doesn't. He's the play caller. No, he's not. So he doesn't pick the coaches. He's not the play caller. What is he? And I was making this point. I don't know, Tone. Hey, wait a minute. Let's do this. What was Phil Jackson's role with the Bulls? Was he the defensive guru? No, that was Tex Winter. Was he the offensive guy coming up with plays? No, that was Clemens. What was Phil's role? Does Sirianni have the same role as the Eagle head coach that Phil had with the Bulls and the Lakers? He didn't pick the players in Chicago. He didn't pick the players in Los Angeles. What's his role? Jackson was a Zen master, monitoring the egos and personalities. Gee, doesn't that sound like Nick's role? Does Nick have the same role that Phil Jackson had? By the way, that's not a bad role if it lands you 11 NBA titles. Hey, I'm not going to sit here and criticize that. That's actually knowing who you are. You're not a personnel guy, Nick. I don't think he ever pretended. And I'm not accusing him of thinking he is. Doug did. Doug Peterson thought he knew personnel. Maybe that's some of the problems that coaches get into. No, you really don't. No, you really don't. You're a coach. Very few coaches have the knowledge of being personnel guys. Jimmy, I think Pete Carroll does. I think to some extent, Bill Belichick does. Think about Andy Reid, for instance. Andy Reid has been in organizations that have been more centric on having a guy make decisions on personnel and Andy being sold on that player more so than Andy having the autonomy when it comes to personnel. Hey, and in theory, if you think about it, the Kansas City Chiefs are not as talented right now than they were when Andy first showed up. So are they losing talent? They are, but they have the kid in the building who is like the equalizer to all that. Doug was Tony, you're right. Doug is the opposite to Nick. Do you think that's by design? That they hired a guy that they wanted directly opposite of the personality of Doug Peterson and Chip Kelly and Andy Reid? Because in theory, Nick is nothing like any of those coaches. Doug was hands-on. Andy was hands-on. Nick's not. Nick is more like Jimmy. He's not hands-on. Sirianni's not a hands-on guy. So what's his role? Staying out of the way? I think there's an art to that. Ask Dallas. Ask Dallas. You know what I mean? Stay out of the way. You know, everyone, they are kind of trying to come up with, like, how about this? How much influence do you truly believe that Nick Sirianni has on Jalen Hurts? What is the influence you think he has on Jalen Hurts? What's the influence? Probably nothing. I don't think he has any influence. Not involved in play calling. He's probably involved in some of the decision making on what type of plays are going to run in a game. But that, again, comes down to Jalen's decision making. He's not a play caller. RPO is not play calling. It's more design. And he gave the play calling up. How could he how could he have an influence on Jalen Hurts' success when he gave up the play calling? Andy Reid's involved in Patrick Mahomes' career because he's the play caller. He was involved with Donovan McNabb's career because he was the play caller. What's Nick Sirianni's influence on Jalen? Does he get any credit for Jalen's evolving into being a quarterback? I don't think he gets any. I don't think he gets any credit. What is the biggest influence he's had on Jalen? Keeps a positive attitude. Okay. That's fair. Kind of stays out of the way. Well, I think that's organizationally designed. Okay. Why do you hate Sirianni so much? I never said I hated him. I'd probably enjoy playing for him. Who said I hated him? Jesus criminy, guy. You get upset when people ask questions, don't you? Or have debates. You're not very good at debating, are you? You're not very good at listening to questions and trying to figure out why the guy's good. I'm trying to figure out what his role is. And hey, get this. Dan Sileo is a Nick Sirianni hater because I asked the question on what his role is. And if he had any influence on Jalen Hurts, and I say no, and I'm hating on him, and he just led a team and helped the team lead a team to a Super Bowl, how's that hating on him? What's his freaking role? I mean, you've been shitting on him for what? Ben, you tell me then, Ben. Hey, Ben, what actual influence do you truly believe he had on Hurts? I'm curious. I don't know. Somebody convinced me he had an influence on Jalen's progression on where he is now as a quarterback. Then I just sent $1 million super chat that you didn't read. Yeah, well, me and Tone right now. If Tone saw $1 million a super chat, I think me and him would hijack it and tell Big Joe and Xander, see you later, dog. Sirianni's a motivational speaker. Okay. Hurts says so himself for one. What's the influence? He's not the play caller. He doesn't design the plays. That is not true. Hurts says it. Yeah, right. Sure, dude. He doesn't play call. He doesn't put the game plan together. And he has an influence on Jalen Hurts' progress. Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni will never be tied together like Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes or Andy Reid and Donovan McNabb or Doug Peterson and Nick Foles or Carson Wentz or Trevor Lawrence because Doug's the play caller. He'll never be tethered. Like, watch this. Aikman and Jimmy Johnson aren't really. It's more North Turner and Aikman. You think Jimmy had any influence at all in play calling? Jimmy Johnson never called an offensive play in his entire life. Jimmy's role is different than Nick's because Jimmy picked the personnel. Nick really doesn't have a role. Nick really doesn't have one. Because you know why? And I like what someone said. Nick Sirianni, and again, we're talking about his 42nd birthday. Happy birthday, coach. is that he's the Pied Piper to what the organization wants to try to have in the locker room and try to have success when it comes to playing on the field. He's the communicator, and he's doing a great job of it. I don't think you hate anyone, but I don't think you give Sirianni enough credit. Okay, 007, what's the credit? What's the credit? Then, all the talent in the world doesn't win. It's the coach. So you think rah-rah speeches win football games? Seriously. You think a guy giving a Newt Rockne speech wins professional football games? I completely do not think that. I think the players make the culture. It starts from the top, and it trickles down to the coach. Everybody in the Philadelphia Eagle organization knows Howie Roseman is the number one guy. Nick works for Howie. Mike Tomlin doesn't work for the GM in Pittsburgh. Pete Carroll doesn't work for the GM, John Schneider, in Seattle. Bill Belichick doesn't work for a GM in New England. These guys don't work for anybody. They answer to the owner. Okay? Nick works for that guy. You think if they got into it, hey, by the way, one thing is for sure, Doug didn't realize that he worked for Howie. That's why they fired him. Insubordination, probably. They probably thought Doug was being insubordinate towards Howie. When in some places and in most you think Doug Peterson works for Trent Baalke in Jacksonville now? Or do you think he completely answers to Shade Khan now? He don't answer to that guy. There's very few places that all these high-end. Andy Reid, you think he answers to Brett Veach? I do not believe that. I do not believe that. Counterpoint, Dallas has been the most talented team for years. Coaches sucked. Yeah, because Jerry's in the way. Coaches have sucked because they've not been empowered. Okay. And Jerry runs everything. The game plan, the talent, the coaching, coaches the team, puts the game plan together. Howie doesn't do all that. He's more, how about this? Let's do this. Do you think Howie Roseman is more comfortable with Nick Sirianni as the head football coach? Coming off a Super Bowl loss than when he was with Doug Peterson coming off a Super Bowl win. You think he's more comfortable with Sirianni as his coach instead of Doug Peterson? I think so. Because I think they're more on the same page with one another in the way they think. I think Doug had his own way of doing things, old school, and he looked at management as what it was. Because you know why? There's a part of me that says, you know why he had that attitude? Doug's a former player. And you always will have an adversarial thought process and negativity towards front office people because you were a former player and you were fired by former front office people before, and you'll always be a little bit apprehensive to trust them. I think that's always built in to the former coaches that will always have an issue. And not, if you look at a lot of the great coaches that have been former players or like didn't really have great relationships with front offices, I mean, Mike Vrabel had that guy Peterson fired in Tennessee. Why? Because Peterson didn't get it. He didn't want to see A.J. Brown gone, did Mike Vrabel. And over $6 million, you let a 25-year-old high-talented player away and let him walk out the building. And when Mike Vrabel saw what that guy did in Philly, that was the end of one of the better general managers in the NFL. That guy's done a nice job in Tennessee. The guy who just got fired, he's a good GM. But he completely screwed that whole deal up. Sirianni brings a Philly attitude. Okay, So he's a cheerleader. He's a cheerleader. They fired him right after the Titans versus the Eagles game. Sirianni is a great coach. Coaches what? Attitudes? What does he do? Here, let me think of somebody in the NFL that's like Nick Sirianni right now, that basically doesn't hire his own coaches, has nothing to do with the play calling, is more of a manager. I'm not saying this is bad. Phil had this role. Who's a guy like that? Who's a coach like that in the NFL? Nah, Sean McVay. He's the play caller. Kyle Shanahan's a play caller. Pete kind of runs the defense and is involved in the offense. You can see it just on the sidelines. Likes to run the ball. Belichick tried. He sucked terribly at the offense, but he's involved with his son on the defensive side. Miami coach is involved in the play calling. Todd Bowles is involved in the defense. Judge is the play caller in New York. Mike McCarthy now is the play caller in Dallas. LaFleur is the play caller in Green Bay. Zach Taylor's the play caller in Cincinnati. Sean McDermott is actually taking on the role of defensive coordinator in Buffalo. There's no place in the NFL that has that role that Nick has. He's a great coach. Mike Tomlin. I don't really see Mike that involved in that defense, do you? And he's a defensive-minded guy. Huh. Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin and Nick Sirianni, do they have the same type of job description? Yeah. That's a good one. Dude, that's a good one. You're right. Callie Green, Mike Tomlin. I don't really see Mike involved in the defensive play calling in Pittsburgh. Okay. That's a heck of a coach. That's a coach that's on his way to Canton. That's a guy that's on his way to Canton. Okay. Okay. Mike won a Super Bowl. That's a pretty good one, man. Mike Tomlin, Nick Sirianni. And again, I'm not saying Nick is not really important in the whole tree of what the Eagles are doing here. But when people are starting to come up with these phony-ass things that he's responsible for on the team, he's not. He picked none of those coaches. He picked none of them. Stoutland was already in the building. The most important coach in the building was not even removed. Shit, that's 2 coaches removed. That's a Chip Kelly nugget. Nothing to. Harbaugh's the play caller in Baltimore. He is the play caller. You see, well, who's the guy they got there now? They got a brand new guy in the building now who's trying to put an RPO system in there for Lamar. So that may be a little, you know what, too? I'll take that back because I think that John has backed up on the play calling in Baltimore because they're trying to install what they do in Philly in Baltimore. So there's a brand new guy up there now. The Jets head coach is involved on the defensive side. Okay. Dan Campbell, that's a good one. Dan Campbell, too, has that kind of role, and he's doing a good one. Yeah, no, if it's Greg Roman in Baltimore that's installing the RPO offense, then yeah. No, hey, look, man, this is not a slam on Nick. I'm just asking a question like this. What's Nick Sirianni's role as the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles is not a slam. It's a question. It's not an indictment. It was not an indictment. You guys are turning it into an indictment. Most people have roles on teams. Most coaches have roles. What's Nick's? Is my only question. And you guys attack me because I'm questioning what his role is. Well, he's the coach. He hires all the coaches. He's the play coach. He's none of that. That's my only point. Then how about this? How important is this? He sets a tone, and here, I'll give you one. How important is it for Nick Sirianni to set the tone in the locker room of having a positive attitude and positive way of thinking and continually thinking we're pushing in the right direction, no negative talk, no absolutely over the top, any kind of loser mentality whatsoever? How important is that? I think that's enormous. I think that's completely enormous. Setting a tone. Here, I'll give you guys an example. How many times sometimes you come home, you've been bitching at your wife or your loved one or your family. You walk into the house and you got a shitty environment and you hate coming in there because everybody's in a bad mood. Nobody likes to do that. You can't win like that. It's a shitty environment. Before you know it, you're living like that every day. And secondly, before you know it, everyone's got a shitty attitude. No one wants to come to work. You're not focused. You hate everything in the building. I'll tell you what, man, I've seen that mentality in Tampa. When I got drafted to the Buccaneers, it's not uncommon. Okay? It's not uncommon. Nobody likes to walk into any kind of shit like that. Nobody likes that kind of stuff. So, hey, and I'll give you a great example of that. When you walked into anything with Jimmy Johnson, Dallas Cowboys, Miami Hurricanes, things that I was associated with him, I was around Jimmy for 6 years. And I'll tell you this, I never in my entire life ever walked into a building that we had negative noise in. He made sure he extinguished that immediately. If you had a shitty attitude, you were out. If you had negativity towards the players, you were out. If you said any bullshit, you needed to fix your attitude. He worked that attitude. Maybe that's Nick's role, is to make sure everybody is focused and 100% understanding that it starts with work environment. I do, man. I think the Eagles have a wonderful work environment. I think it's a pleasure to go to work. From 30,000 feet looking down in, I think it probably looks like it's a wonderful place to work and a wonderful place to coach. I mean, it's probably not Camelot, but what places are? Right? So, hey, there's nothing wrong with having a role of a guy who makes sure the environment in your locker room is a positive and winning attitude. There's nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, I think that's actually harder to coach than calling an RPO play. Hey, run an RPO play. Getting play. Hey, seriously, I think this is a great conversation, Tone. What do you think is harder to do, to connect with players mentally, emotionally, or play calling? What do you think is harder? Let me say this to you. You think Doug Peterson really connected with Carson Wentz? Maybe this is what got him fired. You think he ever really communicated? And maybe the Eagle front office said, dude, he couldn't connect with Wentz. He's not going to connect with Jalen. He's not going to get it. He's going to give up on him the same way Nick Saban did. You watch. He won't have the patience. Because Nick's worried about his legacy too. Not a problem with that. All head coaches like those guys have massive egos. I get it. I'm not criticizing Doug either. Doug's half wrong. If I go, so Wentz is Doug's fault? No. Doug is his own fault. Once again, I'm not talking about Carson Wentz. I'm talking about why Doug got fired too. And that, to me, it just seems to me that Howie Roseman is in a better place with Nick Sirianni because I think they're on the same wavelength on what his job description is than what Doug and Howie were. You see, Doug wanted to dip his beak into the player pool. Howie wasn't having any of that. They weren't having any of that. Would Doug Peterson have had the patience to coach Jalen Hurts? Or would he have overcoached him? Would Doug have overcoached Jalen? Isn't it funny? The less coaching that Sirianni has done for Jalen Hurts, the more success he's having. Man, is that confidence in your guy and connecting with your guy? You got to have a ton of balls when it comes to having confidence that that player is not going to take advantage of you being given the ability to actually grow yourself. How many coaches overcoach players? All of them. All of the coaches all of them, all overcoach. Try this, try that, do this, do that, this technique, that technique, instead of letting the guy just be that guy. Yeah, Doug benched Carson for Jalen. Yeah, I'm sure that was Doug's comment and thought. For who? Nate Sudfeld? Yeah, whatever, dude. Nate Sudfeld. Yeah, we got to take a look at Nate Sudfeld. Why? Think about the job that Doug Peterson, think of this. Would Doug have had the patience to coach Jalen Hurts that Nick has? He lets Jalen just be Jalen, and he trusts his game management and his in-game decision-making, I think, more than what Doug would have. I do. Look, I think Doug has done a remarkable job with Trevor Lawrence. And I'm not saying Doug is not a good coach, because I completely believe that he is. But Trevor Lawrence is a different style of playing than what Jalen is. Man, I'll tell you what, Doug has my mentality. Those dual threat guys, I'm getting there. I'm not near there. I'm more where Trevor is. Trevor Lawrence is one of the greatest talented athletes at quarterback that I've ever seen come out of college. No one was ever saying that about Hurts. And no one still says that about Hurts. Not in your wildest imagination would you ever say that. Trevor Lawrence was one of the most anticipated draft picks at quarterback in NFL history. And Doug is an old school guy that is more in tune with Trevor. I think it's interesting on what would have happened if Doug had stayed. Okay? On what would have happened if Doug would have stayed and coached Jalen. Do you really believe that he'd be where he is now under Doug? Do you? So maybe there's the value to Sirianni. Hey, dude, go be you. Dude, you got to have a lot of faith in your guys. Maybe that's maybe that's Nick's greatest strength. You see what we're doing here? Now we're on the side of his strengths. You know what? Maybe the greatest strength he has is, hey, kid, go out and be you, man. And then we'll worry about what to fix after we figure it out. Instead of doing, why don't you go here? Why don't you go here? Why don't you go there? No way. I don't believe Doug had any investment in Hurts. I would think that Doug's probably very shocked where he is right now. Dan, what's your favorite sports team? Oh, Miami Hurricanes. Miami Hurricanes. I mean, dude, I'm more of watching. I like all sports. I like players. Not so. I like players and fans, then a couple teams. Does that make sense? I like how the fan base gets, like, look what's going on in Buffalo right now. So according to Sean McDermott, and hey, here's another thing to Nick Sirianni. How do you think Nick would have handled that Stephon Diggs situation? How do you think he would have handled Stephon Diggs? Because according to Sean McDermott, it's now been extinguished and it's been resolved. How do you think he would have handled that? Better? Okay. I think they would have done that more closed doors. And when the media asked, Sean McDermott's biggest problem was he went public and went, I'm very concerned. He shouldn't have said nothing. Just the same thing that they've done with the Jonathan Gannon story. They had a prepared statement. You see how much, and by the way, do you see how angry they got at that sports writer in Philadelphia that attacked Jalen Carter right out of the gate on one of the happiest days of his life? They jumped down that guy's throat. They were offended. They're a very smart organization. They kind of remind you the same way that the Raiders used to be back in the old day. He would have told him to be patient like a flower. Yeah, you put the little seedling in a cup, then your sprouts out, then you put it in a little tiny Dixie cup. Then before you know it, the flower grows, comes up, and you'll see the sprout. And that's kind of where we are now as an Eagle organization. We're kind of now not sprout. Last year, we were the sprout. Now, we're the flower. We lost our flower things, petals things. Now we're growing them back again. And now we're going for another season. Be like, damn, dog. Holy shit, man. That guy needs a hookah hit. Maybe what you need to do is bang on that Aaron Rodgers Tuca a little bit there, homie. I mean, Nick, man. Hey, the best part of Nick Sirianni, can I tell you what, is his daughter. Holy cow, man. You know, dude, I don't know if you've ever seen that when his daughter's mimicking him. And you know what? That just shows me, too, what kind of home he has. If his daughter could do that, he lets her do that, must be really cool in his home, too. Because his daughter gets up there on the press conference and starts goofing on the father just like that. And I tell you, I love it, man. So maybe he is like a father figure to some of those guys in that locker room. Yeah, Nick, you need to take that hookah hit, homeboy. Doug loved Nick Foles coming out of college. So I'm not surprised he's doing well with Trevor Lawrence. They have similar styles. Yeah, and I think similar attitudes too, Weapon. Okay? Dan, tell your great made-up humans. Yeah, okay. Somebody asked me my favorite pro sports team. God, do I have one? My favorite pro sports team, all time or right now? Or just like my favorite pro sports team? It's probably the Yankees. You know, I haven't really watched the Yankees, though. Since, you want to hear something? I really haven't been a super Yankee fan since Steinbrenner died. I'm talking to Dad because he and I were friends. He lived in Tampa and used to walk into my studio. You imagine the boss walking into your studio? It was wild. I used to do a show on WDAE. And by the way, here's before we go to the top of the hour, by the way, we haven't even gotten to the topics yet. Okay, we haven't even gotten to the topics, so we'll do that at the top of the hour. But hey, Mr. Snuffy, don't be upset with the most successful franchise in the history of American sports. You're welcome. Okay, don't be upset that you're upset that the Yankees. Don't be upset. It's okay. I got you, kid. Okay, it's all right. Don't worry about it. So Tampa is the only city in American sports that has 2 American League broadcasting rights in it. And it's because of George Steinbrenner. Okay, so we aired Rays games on WDAE, but somehow Steinbrenner got the Yankee rights in Tampa too. And man, it used to just kill Vince Namoli because Yankee games were on the opposing station. And of course, we get bigger numbers. Rays sucked. They were the devil dogs back in those days. And George Steinbrenner lived right near the station. And I prodded him. He lived on Rocky Point, where his offices were. Not on Rocky Point. He lived on Bayshore, but his offices were on Rocky Point. So I'd go out to this place called Landry's for lunch, and I'd see George Steinbrenner there. And so George Steinbrenner, he's there with, get this, he's having lunch with General Schwarzkopf. Come over here. Come here. Come here. And General Schwarzkopf, because Central Command's in Tampa. You guys have to know this. I have had lunch with General Schwarzkopf, Tommy Franks, and General Petraeus. Those are my friends. Okay, Schwarzkopf, Franks, and General Petraeus are my friends because Central Command's there in Tampa. And I used to go broadcast my show at Central Command. So they're Schwarzkopf and Steinbrenner. Yeah. Sit down, have a hamburger. Here, have a. I'm like, I don't need. Yeah, I'm a seafood. Get some shrimps then. Okay. So the next day, George Steinbrenner brings a whole shitload of Yankee shit in. He knew I was a DiMaggio fan. Gives me jerseys, number 5, all this shit, all this DiMaggio shit. Here's signed something by Joe. So we start talking Yankee baseball. He would just come in unannounced. There's only 2 people who have ever had that autonomy. JM, there's only 2 people that have ever had the autonomy where they didn't need an invitation. That was Arnold Palmer and George Steinbrenner. Because Arnold Palmer used to just pop in. And he'd be walking when I was doing the Arnold Palmer Invitational. It was called Bay Hill then. And he'd walk in with Mulligan, his dog. And he'd sit down and just start. I'm in the middle of talking basketball, Magic or Lightning or some shit. And here come Arnold Palmer. And of course, I'm going to stop. It's Arnold Palmer. He'd sit down. I'm holding the dog's leash. And I go, what's the dog's name? He goes, Mulligan. Of course. Oh, man. General Schwarzkopf, what a great dude. There used to be a restaurant called the Mayflower where I lived. And General Schwarzkopf would go in there every single day and have a bagel, and he would have breakfast in there. And you'd see him in there. He'd just be sitting in there, and you could go sit down and talk with him. He had no problem with it. Really a great man. I was a big fan of General Schwarzkopf. And he's come in the studio too. What a good dude, man. All right. We are going to hit on our topics. Finally, want to thank Carolyn Goodman in the first hour for coming aboard. By the way, I saw that CBS put out the top 100 players in the NFL. I didn't go top 100. I went top 20. Also, Pro Football Talk, we had a preseason poll. Now they do. Kind of different. We'll take a look at all that. Our topics are next. Hour number 2. Keep it here on the